Churchill once said, if you stop to throw rocks at every dog that barks, you'll never get anywhere.
Yeah.
So sometimes we have to remember, you can't, I mean, like we said earlier, you can't address everyone that criticizes you or even everyone that tries to argue with you. Sometimes you just got to put your facts out there and let it sink in with other people.
And in trying to figure out, you know, what is the criticism designed to do? Criticism is designed to do, you mentioned constructive criticism earlier. If there is a constructive criticism, then there is a destructive criticism. And if that criticism is trying to break you down and get you into an argument, make you feel bad about your point, whatever, that's something you definitely need to avoid. So,
right.
What is the purpose of the criticism? A lot of times, it's a one-liner. You're an idiot. That'll never work.
Yeah.
Well, there's no proof behind their statement that would draw me into, for me to retaliate to something like that. Like you said, brings them up to my level.
You're a bigot. You're a racist. You know, we spend more time trying to prove we're not racist than we do really addressing the issues that between the races.
Yeah, I agree. And here's one thing that I when we're talking about racism and everything, there's criticism that comes to you that only the way you live your life are you going to be able to defeat that criticism.
That's right. And
racism is one of those things. You know, you I can put whatever I want to on social media, but the way I live my life is proof that I'm not a racist. And I don't have to, you know, if I agree with a certain policy and somebody says, oh, that makes you a racist, I'm not worried about it. Because I know I'm not.
Yeah. And, you know, it goes back to one of our other videos. If they'll go back and watch, if you missed this one, missed this one about reputation, then go back and watch it because, you know, your name, having a good name, people know you, your reputation is going to stand up for you and argue for you sometimes.
That's exactly right.
Instead of you voicing your argument.
That's exactly right. And it's better that the answer to criticism comes sometimes from someone who knows you rather than from you. But social media, I think, for some reason or another, our culture, we have really, we've taken advantage of this instant media opportunity, and not in the best of ways.
Right.
I think it started out pretty good, especially. So I was one of those reluctant ones. I might get on that Facebook thing. I got a MySpace. What do I need a Facebook for? You know, I was one of those people. But then when I did get on, and over the years I've reconnected with people from my past and been able to reach out and keep in touch with family and see pictures, and I'm like, this is wonderful. But then, like everything else with humanity, it seems that we take this great thing and we pervert it and use it for such ill use. So I think we've done that with every type of social media.
And I'm guilty. Man, I can get in some arguments, or I call them discussions, and then they get to be, after a while, they get to be arguments. And what we've got to remember, even if you're in a discussion and it gets to the point that you're not making any headway, you got to remember, most of the time, you're not going to convert anybody you're
absolutely
having an argument with or discussion with. You're not going to convert them. You're just putting out a good, common sense opinion and some facts to base it, that you base your opinion on. And you put that out there, and if they give an opinion and you have some facts or a good common sense response to that, address those things that they brought up. But after a while, after a little bit of, a length of time, you got to decide for yourself, we're getting nowhere.
Yeah. Now let's go back to the other criticism. So we've talked a great deal about social media, the criticism that's so freely given there. You used the term constructive criticism. I would like to say that I am not sure there's ever a time that somebody criticized me and thought, I'm gonna go help old Jeff out and criticize him. You know what I mean? However,
Yeah.
however, I will say this: I don't think constructive criticism can be defined or determined by who's speaking it. I think criticism becomes constructive when I evaluate it, realize that there may be some truth to the criticism, and then begin to try to change any negative thing that I have derived from that criticism to where I can become a better person. So I think constructive criticism is when I take criticism, I evaluate criticism, I evaluate my life, I look for patterns of criticism. If 4 different people have criticized me over the same thing over the course of a couple of years or whatever, I might need to look at that area of my life and say,
Right.
maybe I need to work on something here. So constructive criticism is really not coming from someone. It's actually something that you embrace and you determine is constructive within yourself.
That's really good.
Yeah.
And that may be why, I have a fault, my kids would say, I have a fault of giving, well, I don't think they'd even call it constructive criticism, but, with my kids, I have a fault of just blurting it out, well, you need to do this, or you need to do that, or, well, you think about, go do this, whatever the suggestion.
Right.
It's just a suggestion.
Right.
Oh, you're criticizing me. But, right, immediately, they don't hear it. They don't take anything. But especially, any of them.
Mm-hmm.
But then, sometimes you see that they've gone away, and they've thought about it, and they come back and say,
Right.
maybe Dad was right. And they
Right.
take some of that advice.
And at that point, they've taken that criticism and made it valuable. So now it's
That's
constructive because they've evaluated it. So let me ask you this: so if you were in retail for many years, you were upper echelon management, lead manager for Walmart for many years, managed people in the banking industry, financial industry now. A person who has served in a managerial position, maybe underneath you, and like in Walmart, you put them in 3 different departments because maybe they had a little trouble here and then a little trouble here, and you move them around. And it seems that they've had the same problem everywhere they go. Now is it time? Should they own that now? Do you bring in some form of criticism that tries to say, look, there's a pattern to this, and how can you get them to see that pattern?
There does come a time when, in situations like that, are really even situations where someone's not performing at their job the way they need to, is that you have to bring them in and say, here's what's expected of you. Here's where you're falling short. I'm going to give you such and such time, a defined time, and the decision is yours. You have to make the decision. Are you choosing to work here and be well, sometimes it's like being a member of the team. They just don't fit in.
Right.
And you have to say, this is your decision. It's not my decision.
Right.
I'm not firing you. You're firing yourself.
Right.
You've got this much time to decide, do you want to be a part of the team? Do you want to get along with other people? Do you want to perform your job at this level? Whatever the issue
Right.
is, I always try to give them it's never the first time we've talked
Right,
about
right.
it. They know what we're talking about before we ever get in the room together. But it's always, you have the decision going forward, but here's the deadline.
We've kind of turned a corner. So we talked earlier more about us receiving criticism. Now we kind of turned a corner and we're talking about how do you give criticism. And really, when we're talking about criticism now, what we're trying to say is how do we make comments without it being critical in a very, very, very negative way, as we've seen. you just gave us a great scenario concerning that whole thing there. You're pointing out the issue that this gentleman or lady is having, has giving them the opportunity. Now, here's what they can hear. He's criticizing me. He don't like me. I'll just quit tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Or they can hear, there may be some things I need to work on. What is he talking about? Was I rude to that customer? Have I been pushing my people harder than I've been working? You know, he can go back and evaluate that. So the way that you give that, and you talked about giving to your children, the way you give that is going to determine really whether or not, it's going to help determine whether or not they can embrace that as constructive criticism.
And my kids have pointed that out to me. It's the
How?
way you
Yeah,
say it, Dad.
yeah,
and
that's right.
and I understand with my, I've not done a good job with that. So, but in fact, I hate to admit it, I do a better job in business
Then you do.
coaching people
Well,
than I do my kids, because I'm so close to my kids.
There's
that
a personal
I just,
investment. There's a huge personal investment.
I want for them so much.
Yeah.
And for the other people, it's like they have a choice. In business, it's a lot of times, I've said a lot of times, there's been times that I have brought someone in like that, and usually when it's down to that final 1 or 2 meetings, I don't just address the issue, but I start addressing, what do you want out of life?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of job do you enjoy doing?
Right.
What do you enjoy? What do you not enjoy about your job? And then maybe even have to coach them on, you know, maybe you need to take a couple days and think
Right.
about, is this really the business you want to be
Right.
in? Is this really the future you want?
Yeah.
And
But you're right. When we do give advice to our children, it does come across as critical. My
It
daughter,
does, yeah.
my daughter says that anytime I say what, I sound like I'm mad. Anytime
What?
so here's what I thought. Here's what I thought I'd do. I'm gonna say what, and if you guys think that I sound angry when I say what, I want you to leave me a comment. So my daughter will say, "Hey, Dad," and I'll say, "What?"
oh my goodness, what'd you say?
Yeah. I don't, I just hear
attacking
this,
me.
what? Yeah, but she hears that I'm
Yeah.
automatically mad. Another way, I do marriage counseling. I do, a fair amount of marriage counseling. I've done drug and alcohol counseling. I've done some marriage counseling. And in marriage counseling, there is this line that you walk as a therapist or a counselor, to where you have to be able to get them to see that negative behavior. And,
Without just pointing a finger.
Exactly. And often you're their pastor and their counselor. And it's like, my pastor told me I was, no, I'm just trying to get you to see. And so there is this tightrope that we walk in trying to get people, as we give out criticism or advice or whatever you want to call it, to try to get people to see they could do things better. Even in counseling, I have to be careful of not saying here's what, because I can identify in the first 3 sessions first 3 hours we meet. Well, I know, and I've got my notes and I've made the answer. Then I have to formulate a plan. How do I get them to that answer? And it may take 3 or 4 more sessions before I can even really directly address that one thing, because I want to make sure that they've owned it, and I can get them to own it without them saying, "Pastor told me I was this," and so
Right.
that's kind of a balancing act there. Now let's talk a little bit about. We've just said these are some good ways to give critiques to people. In doing that, certain people are gifted at that. Certain
Yeah.
people are just really good at being able to do that.
But here's one thing I find, though, is in business, let's compare the two again. In business, I've prepared for that meeting. I know what we're going to talk about. I've made some notes, what I want to talk about, or at least have been through the issue. With your kids, I hate to keep kids. I love you to death. I love you, but you know they call you. Hadn't called you in a week or so, and they call you and said, "Dad, this is going on, and I need this and that, and
right.
I'm going to do this," and they're looking for you to say, "Wow, great."
Yeah, they want an agreement.
Yeah. But but if you don't agree,
Yeah.
you can't just say, "Yeah, go for it." I mean, there's one thing to be an encourager, but there's another thing to encourage.
An enabler.
Yeah, being an enabler. when
Well, I think we touched on it earlier when we talked about people respond emotionally instead of intellectually often, and we have to be careful not to respond emotionally.
Yeah.
And you know, when our kids call us, and because you know, one of the things that we could do in a scenario like that is we could say, "Listen, all of that, what's a lot of stuff. Let me think on it. I want to call you back. Let me think on this. Give me a couple of hours. I'm going to call you back and we'll talk this through."
Yeah.
Because if we don't, we're giving one of two things. We're giving our permission or we're criticizing. And that's all they're going to hear.
That's right.
And so we have to back off and,
That's good
and
advice
find that.
right there.
find
I feel
that.
like I changed the subject on you. What were you asking me, or what were you talking about?
Well, we were talking about how do we talked about giving advice and everything. So how can we identify and try to be more patient with people because they may not be gifted at posting stuff on social media. Maybe their point comes across more blunt than it meant to, or maybe when we first looked, that was their emotional response. That's stupid. and you know, I know good and well when I was young in the ministry, there had to be times that I went into a board meeting, all gung-ho about something, and my board looked at me, and in their minds they're thinking, that's so stupid. How do we tell this guy that's stupid without hurting his feelings and robbing him of his joy and everything? So, you know, how can we, with our children, with social media, with business, with church, with any other interaction we have with people, how can we program ourselves to say, slow down, they may just be running off raw emotion?
That's hard.
Yeah,
That's hard.
yeah. You know, a lot of people talk about the counting to 10 rule. You know,
Yeah.
they used to tell you, you don't do anything until you counted to 10. Well, I can count 10 pretty quick.
5, 10.
We're there. Now let's go at it. But I do believe that in all of those scenarios, you know, I think the key is training ourselves to hear or be willing to dig deeper and hear the other person. So maybe it's somebody you know on Facebook and they've criticized one of your stances. Again, I think you need to try to hear them and dig a little bit deeper. If it's your children, you know, we go back to the why questions. You know, I think,
Yeah.
well, son, why are you wanting to do that? And or do you know, why do you want to move, or why do you want me to loan you money? You know,
Yeah.
what are you going to do with that money?
If it's young children at home,
Mm-hmm.
whether teenagers or young children,
Mm-hmm.
I think one thing is we can set up a time that the children know this is a good time to come address questions that I have.
Mm-hmm.
You know, sometime in the
Yeah.
evening, let them know, you know, after dinner, we're going to take a few minutes and then before we leave the table, and if anybody has something to talk about. Because the biggest problem, I think, today, or one of the biggest instigators to all this that we're talking about, is we're all in such a hurry. You think about it. You're sitting there scrolling through Facebook and you run across something you disagree with. Your mind hadn't been on that subject but for a second.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you were just looking at puppies and kittens,
Right, yeah.
and laughing about goats riding donkeys, you know.
Right,
and,
yeah.
and then all of a sudden you're thrown into a political argument and you're like, oh, I got to tell them this. And then if you're like me, you're on your phone, and I hate that one
it
little
never
thing
comes
you're
out.
typing.
Yeah, never comes out the way I meant for it.
It
to.
doesn't, and and I don't want to type for an hour to say
Yeah.
what I've got to say.
And let me just tell all my Facebook friends, I can spell. I really can. I don't care what that phone makes me look like an idiot, but I can spell. You know, you're right. We didn't do this intentionally, but as far as having that open discussion, dialogue time, but when our kids were growing up, we always ate supper together. Every meal, every supper we ate together, and it would grow exponentially as their friends would come over and so forth. But we would eat supper together, and it was our time to go back over the day and talk about issues of life and issues they might be having in school and so forth. So it was a time for us to kind of slow down and have longer, more integrated and more heartfelt, thought-out conversations. But we don't do that very much anymore. And you're right, we're quick to respond. And again, it's emotion over intellect. We need to slow down and go back to our intellect and let our intellect guide us in those conversations. First of all, criticism is not a negative. It's not always a negative thing. Even though it says it's an expression of disapproval, that's the first definition. The second definition is the analysis and judgments of the merits and faults of a literary or artistic work. And that can really play into more than just literary or artistic. There's something called textual criticism, which in my industry, in the pastoral world, when I hear textual criticism, what that means is it goes to the literary content of biblical scrolls, biblical writings, and so forth. So criticism, even in public interaction, can be a very positive thing as we look at it and evaluate it and do an analysis on it and then come to a final judgment. Not a quick emotional judgment, but an intellectual final judgment.
And part of the word criticism is critique.
Right.
To be critiqued.
To be critiqued.
And people have been very nice to us.
Yeah.
Growing to be the most popular.
Yeah. Number one most watched YouTube.
Yeah. Growing to be that famous. They haven't criticized us, but
Right.
we honestly want people to
Critique
give us
us.
feedback.
We want critique.
Don't call me bald or ugly. But okay,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, things like this, just simple things like this. We were talking. A couple of people contacted us and was talking to us about the program, and they said that we sounded a little tinny, and we addressed that today. Hopefully, we both sound a little bit more like Elvis than. And we changed our mic settings and what have you. So yeah, we're looking for some critique,
Some feedback,
So,
yeah. We got some good feedback a couple of times. You know,
Yeah.
my daughter gave us some good
Mhm.
feedback, and Justin, your son, gave
Yep.
us some good feedback, and
Yeah,
gave us some little tips. So you know, not
Help us.
necessarily critique, but gave us some tips.
yeah. So we'd take anything you got out there. We're just
Yeah.
having
Yeah.
fun with this and trying to actually do like we said, just bring some common sense approaches
Yeah.
to some situations we're going through today.
Maybe one last thing to touch on, if you don't have anything else.
All right, I don't.
What about someone, and I might as well just be blunt about this, what about someone from your past that just absolutely makes up stuff that is not true?
Right.
And they may feel,
Right.
like we've discussed before, they may feel like it's really true.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think that we, again, I've said this without saying this. We always have to consider the source. People are emotional. We are all emotional creatures. Some people more emotional than others. Some people are driven more by their emotions than others. Some people can flow smoothly into both areas of their life, intellectual and emotional. But some people get into their emotional to the point to where it begins to be almost delusional. And when you're hurt, you got two kids and your kids are little and they're fighting, you're going to get two views out of it. They're going to come tell you saw what happened, and you know that one of them is very accurate. and you know the other one, because they're hurt over it or because they're feel victimized, theirs is a little bit different. Their storytelling is a little bit different. And we have that with people from our past that get
Yeah.
offended at us. And if they never resolve that in themselves, and that's the key, they're going to come to us emotionally. And in doing so, they come with their own slant of reality and their delusional, part of past. And we do this even in healthy relationships. We sometimes do this. People are better than they really were, or they worse than they really were. You know what I mean? So if we talked about some guy from our past that was just this guy that everybody knew was the toughest guy, and all, we would build him up probably to be bigger than he really was, meaner than he really was, and we have created our own reality for that person, and it's slightly delusional. Because we either have idolized or villainized that individual. Those people do that to us, and what we have.
But most people don't get very far off the truth. Do you think?
I agree. Unless they are.
They may have a little bit of slant to it because of their perspective, but it isn't just total made up.
That comes from
Stuff.
that comes from a deep hurt. It comes from emotional instability and a sense of delusion. Here's the thing, though: you can't fight lies. How are you going to, until there is a factual thing stated that your hair was orange when I met you? I can show you a picture. It really wasn't. But if it's a lie saying, you said this to me, and 30 years ago you said this to me, nobody recorded the conversation. You can't go back and fight that. You know it's not in your character. You know you didn't do it, but you can't fight that. And I think it goes back to what we talked about in the beginning. Some things have to be, I think, non-addressed. Your reputation and who you are today and how you've interacted with other people certainly should weigh in for something. People who would believe something like that don't know you to begin with, or they're looking for something to hold against you. So.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Well, we kind of come to a close on this one. We're talking about criticism and how to handle criticism, what to do with criticism, how to give criticism, what critiquing is, and all of these things. And once again, we're going to close the way we opened. Well, we are Common Sense Cafe, where the coffee is always hot and the advice is at best lukewarm. Until next time, I'm Jeff.
And Kevin.
Common Sense Cafe.